finishing the sections of the SAT or ACT, especially those that are really time consuming, finishing those in time is one of the biggest stresses for students. And I get this question all the time as a result, which is, I keep running out of time on some SAT or ACT test. Maybe it's the SAT math, no calculator, or maybe it's the ACT science, whatever it is. And then the question is, what can I do to complete the test in the time limit? What can I do to make sure I finish the section and put an answer down for every question that's not just a guess? And what I want to suggest to you in this video, that except for a small minority of students, particularly those trying to get a perfect score, worrying about finishing the test is not only not the best idea, it's actually counterproductive. It can actually hurt your score. We need to rethink and reframe the problem to not ask, well, how can I finish the test? But instead, what can I do to maximize my score? What can I do to get more questions right? That's what's important. So what I want to do in this video is reframe the problem, think about it in a different way, give you some ways of approaching the sections in general that may change your focus from finishing the test to maximizing your score, to improving your score, which is ultimately what we want to do. So let's reframe the problem. This first statement is kind of obvious, but also not when you think about it. So we don't get points for finishing the test. There's no bonuses we get if I did all 40 ACT science questions. I mean, hooray, you did, but you don't get anything extra for that. We get points for getting questions right? I mean, it's kind of obvious, but also something we have to keep in mind. Whenever we focus too much on finishing the test, we might be losing track of the idea that we want to improve our scores, and just because we finish the test doesn't actually mean we improve our scores. In fact, as I'll talk about in a second, it can actually harm your score. I see this a lot where someone is getting like a 26 in ACT reading, let's say. They'll say, oh, I'm getting a 26 in ACT reading. I can't finish the test. What can I do to finish? And for a student like that, especially, finishing the ACT reading section, trying every question is not really the problem. The problem is, what are they doing that's getting them a 26, and what can we do to get you to a 27, 28, 29, and improve from there? And as I said, if you're going for a 1600 or if you're going for a 36, then yeah, finishing the test is of course something you have to worry about. But for the vast majority of people, that's not the priority. In fact, excessive worrying about finishing the test actually can harm your score. Now, why is this the case? Why can worrying about finishing the test excessively hurt your score? There's a few reasons. First, if you're worrying about finishing the test, most likely that means you don't have a reliable, reproducible strategy that you can use for each of these particular sections. The focus is probably on finishing the test rather than executing on some strategy, and this can lead to inconsistent results. The second thing is probably the most devastating. When students are worried about finishing the test, a lot of times they're going to rush through your easy questions, make silly mistakes, avoidable mistakes, get them wrong. That's a disaster. We need to bank as many of those points as possible. Students also, when they're worrying about finishing the test, will spend too little time on questions on the margin, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And then finally, students who are worried about finishing the test spend too much time on hard questions, and as a result often face what I call the Doomsday Scenario. And what is the Doomsday Scenario? Well, let's take a test taker. We'll call him Rob. So worried about finishing the test, Rob rushes through easy questions, we've already talked about this, and makes silly, avoidable mistakes. That's number one. He spends way too much time on hard questions and may even still get them wrong despite spending that much time. That's even worse, right? You spend a disproportionate amount of time on a hard question and you still get it wrong. It's kind of a disaster. Because Rob spent so much time on hard questions, he has to guess or rush on questions later in the test or elsewhere in the test, and a lot of these questions may end up being easy and mediums. And finally, as I'll talk about more in a second, no gains on the margins, on the marginal questions. So way too much time spent chasing too few points and getting too few points rather than prioritizing the things that will actually get points and improve. So this is a disaster. We have to avoid this completely. If any of this to you seems familiar, you might be falling into this situation, and what I'm talking about in this video is exactly geared for you. What do I mean by questions on the margin? What's going on there? So let's, as a thought experiment, let's imagine that we ranked all the questions in an ACT science section by difficulty. So we put them in order if we somehow knew their difficulties from easy to hard. Now, I put them in order from 1 to 40. There is no order of difficulty on ACT science. I'm just using this as an example. This is abstract. Let's just say, like, this is not necessarily question 1, question 2, question 3. Let's just say this is in order from easy on the one hand, easiest on the one hand, to hardest on the other. So just use your imagination. Imagine I just ranked these questions in order. So there's a number of these questions that are going to be relatively easy for you. So let's say everything from 1 to, let's say, 17 are easy questions for you. Let's say as well there's a bank of medium questions, which you can do pretty well on. So let's make medium, let's make medium this orange. So let's say these questions are medium questions. Let's actually do this. That if you have enough time, you can get them right because they require a little bit more effort, but they're not crazy hard. And then let's say there's a chunk of questions. Let's say here. Well, that's not going to work. Let's say there's a chunk of questions. Say these. That are really hard, that even if you had unlimited time, you'd still have trouble with them. Let's just say. These questions in the middle, so these right here, we'll highlight them in yellow, are what I would call the questions on the margin for you. In other words, these are questions that with additional time, with additional effort, you are in line to improve on those, get those right. If you don't have the time, if you don't put in the effort, you're likely to get them wrong. So they're kind of the tipping point questions for you, right? Questions that are not really easy, not really hard, and questions that are maybe a little bit harder than medium, but if you had a bit more time and effort, you could actually improve on them and get them right. These are your marginal questions, we'll call them. Now, this is all very theoretical because we can't really identify very easily what your marginal questions are. We have to kind of think of this abstractly, but there are a set of questions on the test that if you had a bit more time, you could attack and get right, and that's where your improvement's coming from. So the improvement is going to come from, in your scores, among other places, these marginal questions, these tipping point questions. So where we want to spend our time is not so much on these hard questions towards the end. Certainly we can a little bit, but really the investment of time and effort has got to be on these marginal questions. That's where the improvement's coming from. The improvement is not going to come from a really hard question like number 40, the hardest one on the test. That's super hard. Maybe eventually we worry about that. But right now, the focus and effort should be on these marginal questions, these tipping point questions where a bit more effort and time spent on them can lead to improvements, questions right, and that leads to gains in scores. Some other bad ideas of things that students sometimes do, which is not good if you're really worried about time and worried about getting questions right, beyond not focusing on questions on the margin. So I hear this a lot, doing hard questions or passages first since they take me the longest and I want to make sure I finish them. That's a very, very, very bad. This is very bad. Do not do it. It's the worst thing you could do. You're doing the opposite of what you want to do. You want to spend time on your easy questions first, then your mediums, then your marginals, then you worry about the hards. You don't do the hard ones first because then you're running head first into the doomsday scenario. Doing questions in order is very often inefficient and actually leading to bad results for you. So it's somewhat okay to do them in order for SAT writing, ACT English, ACT Math, and SAT Math, though there's a little bit of a wrinkle there because of the multiple choice and grid-ins mixed in one section. So it's somewhat okay to do them in order. Most of the time you will do them more or less in order. But as I'll talk about in a second, you want to skip around a little bit. You want to be aggressive in your skipping. You don't want to just do a number 12 because it's number 12, right? You do it because you think you can do the question. And it's actually really bad to do questions in order in SAT reading, ACT reading, and ACT science. And I go into more detail about each of these sections in the various videos I have on YouTube and in my courses. And then the other third problem is the sunk cost fallacy. So as I was just saying, A lot of students, when they see a question, they feel like they have to come up with an answer for it. Otherwise, they've wasted their time. So they'll spend as much time as they may need to try to get an answer. When in fact, you want to evaluate questions and figure out, okay, if this is a question that looks hard or time consuming, this is one I want to skip. And I'll talk more about that when we get into our strategies. So what can we do for our strategies? So as I said, I cover specific strategies for particular tests in YouTube videos and my courses. So these are just general principles we can follow. First thing, make sure you get those easy questions and passages done first. You want to bank these points. No silly mistakes, no avoidable mistakes. You don't want to have to be rushing through the test to get these done. Take them at a comfortable pace, but get solid answers for them. Bank these points. That's the foundation of your score. Spend more time on your marginal questions. And for most students, these are in like the mediums or medium hards, right? These are those tipping point questions. It's hard for you to know which questions are your marginal questions. That's why, as we'll talk about in a second, it's going to be about getting your easy stuff done, skipping hard stuff, working on the stuff in the middle. Prioritize in the hard questions. So once you've finished the marginal questions, once you've kind of gotten all the easy medium stuff done, then you worry about the hard questions, but you don't necessarily do them in order. There are going to be some hard questions that may actually not be too bad, and those are the ones you're going to want to attack first. And then, as I've just mentioned with the sunk cost fallacy, aggressively skip questions that seem difficult, time-consuming, annoying, and so on. And they're questions you can attack when and if you have time at the end after you've finished everything else. This is a bit test-specific because of the way order of difficulty works out and the way the tests are structured. But I do want to say that when I'm taking tests, I'm skipping all the time. If I even get an inkling that a question's going to be annoying, time-consuming, whatever, I skip it. Move on. Get all the easy stuff done, and then I'll circle it in my booklet and then come back and tackle the question. There's no reason at all to commit to any question that even seems marginally difficult until you've finished all the easy stuff and you've done your questions that are more on the margin. One caveat I always give with skipping, just watch your bubbling. Make sure you don't miss bubble. This is why I recommend generally bubbling in a page at a time. It avoids this issue, so just be careful with your bubbling. So those are some strategies. Those are some ways to think about it. I hope this video has given you a new way to think about completing these tests and what you really should be focusing on if you're looking for improvements. Now, if you're getting 33s, 34s, 35s, or if you're getting 1560s and 1570s and you need to finish, that's the problem for you. That's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother video. But for the vast majority of students who are in the 20s, who are in the 1200s, the 1300s, and so on, this is the priority. It's to focus on the questions that will lead to your improvement, not focusing on something like finishing the test, which in the abstract sounds like a good idea, but in practice actually ends up hurting your score. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.